Miladin, I would like to congratulate you. It is a great event. I was here this morning, and I enjoyed the way you introduced the philosophy of the smart grid, the need we have in the society for energy and distribution of energy to the users, and by assembling an excellent team of collaborators to be students, the poster session, it is a great event. This is an example of what TEES, our state agency, would like to be in the future. For many years, we have been doing research administration as well as development, but now we want to go back to our core mission, which is workforce development, educating the professionals who are going to be the driving forces for the economic development of the state and beyond. We want to develop centers that are at the cutting edge of research and development so they can create the ideas that will help us with technology generation and commercialization. So this is everything that the Smart Grid Center actually is doing, and I'm glad to see this, and I think you will be one of our successful centers, success stories for TEES, which is TEES will be celebrating the 100th anniversary. 1914, it was established by the state of Texas to develop new technologies. Go back 100 years ago, and much of what we now have was not in existence. So 100 years later, we have thought leaders like Miladin, who is going to help us go into the next generation, and maybe that will be the 21st century great success story. So I would like to say a few things also about my understanding of the terminology of smart grid, if you allow me, Miladin, because my area of expertise is smart materials. And 20 years ago, when we started this new area of smart materials, people were making fun of us. What is a smart material? And then if there is a smart material, there is a dumb material, and I know you have been discussing those terms. So just in analogy, I would say if we start first with the terminology of an active grid, it's a grid that will be able to respond, to have a control. You have control authority. You can decide how to distribute the energy. But then the next thinking is of the adaptive grid. So it can sense the needs, maybe the energy demand, maybe there is an event somewhere that took place, and then it can adapt itself. It can redistribute the energy. So that's what we did in materials. The overlap of the active grid with the adaptive grid gives you the smart grid. And that's what we did, and we felt good for a few years until someone developed intelligent materials. So I expect the same thing to happen here. In a few years, you have an intelligent grid and maybe something that will develop as an autonomous system that can not only sense, act, but at the same time decide with intelligence how to take its own actions. And something probably along these lines is already being under development. I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I wish you success for the remainder of the day and the workshop, and I hope many great collaborations will follow up based on this workshop that you are holding today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri, for your kind words. A lot of expectations, apparently, so we're going to live with the expectations and deliver as we move forward. Yes, just a short comment. As much as we are expanding and doing research and whatnot, everything is changing, everything is moving forward, so I'm pretty sure, give it another decade or whatnot, we're going to be talking about totally different and new concepts where to move. So we are on a journey, and the destination is whatever it's going to be as we move forward. So there's a lot of opportunity there. We want to thank a few people because I'm not sure they were here in the morning. This is a sort of a repetitive, so I do apologize a little bit. Chad, are you here? Right there. I want to thank, and Nancy, I don't know if Nancy's there. Nancy's there too. Is Andrea there? And Andrea is out. Well, tell Andrea what I, what I did tell everyone else. We want to thank all of you, Chad and Nancy and Andrea, very much for the logistics and the help. Here's Andrea coming in. I'm just thanking you. So, this is not possible without the help of people like Chad and Nancy and Andrea. So we really appreciate it. I want to. I want to thank again our distinguished speakers. Now the highlight of the luncheon is the talk by Pat Wood III. He's going to come and tell us a few things from his angle. He's a very distinguished alumni of Texas A&M, as you can see here, and this is only a list of few things that Pat has done. He's kind enough to come when we invite him. We appreciate that, Pat, very much. He was here with us in 2004, as I was mentioning this morning, and he's back here. Now, we are privileged that he brought his father, Pat Wood the second, and we really are honored that you were able to come. And we understand you are here in town, so we're going to see you around. I'm pretty sure, in one of these stores or somewhere, So a pleasure meeting you, sir. With this, I want to turn over to Pat, and the floor is yours. No, go ahead.
All right, for those of you who haven't eaten dessert, the true highlight of the lunch is that chocolate cake. So you need to do a little arm wrestling out there. Who in the room are students here at some part of the university family? Great, I just like knowing who I'm talking to. I was happy to be a student here. I can't think it was 9 years ago, Mladen, that I was speaking in the room down the hall. Gosh, it seems like yesterday. I back in 2003, which I guess was the year before that, on August 14th, to be precise, I was on my first family vacation with my wife and, at the time, 3 children home from D.C., where I'd been serving for 2 years as President Bush's head of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and was visiting my dad and mom in Port Arthur, and Dad and I were over for the day with a group of other people, touring a liquefied natural gas plant in Lake Charles, and that's back in the day when we were running out of natural gas. Doesn't that seem like a history of a lifetime ago? And we were looking at how to bring in gas that's been liquefied in countries like Trinidad or Algeria and bringing it into the United States. So we were touring that plant when I got a phone call from my chief of staff who said, Pat, there's something going on that you need to know about. So I'm going to read a short story, very short, from the only journal I really trust, Scientific American, about what happened when I got that phone call. On August 14, 2003, shortly after 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, a high-voltage power line in northern Ohio brushed against some overgrown trees and shut down, a fault, as it's known in the power industry. The line had softened under the heat of high current coursing through it. Normally, the problem would have tripped an alarm in the control room of First Energy Corporation, an Ohio-based utility company, but the alarm system failed. Over the next hour and a half, as the system operators tried to understand what was happening, 3 other lines sagged into trees and switched off, forcing other power lines to shoulder the extra burden. Overtaxed, they cut out by 4:05 p.m., it's 2 hours later, tripping a cascade of failures throughout southeastern Canada and 8 northeastern states. All told, 50 million people had power out for up to 7 days, in the biggest blackout in North American history. The event contributed to at least 11 deaths and cost an estimated $6 billion. So when people ask me, what do I mean by the smart grid? I tell them what happens when the dumb grid doesn't work right. And that's what happens in the modern world as it wreaks havoc. So I, along with the Department of Energy and Canadian officials across the border, and I just want to say, are there any Canadians in the room? Not one in Texas. Okay, we're lucky to have an ally like that, because what our Ohio utility did should have been a cause for war, but it was not. The Canadians worked with us very professionally to investigate the cause of this blackout. And it took over the next 6 months. It was actually, for a federal project, an extremely expedited and thorough and deep and time-consuming analysis, but we concluded that it was a combination of human error and equipment failures. Deep. Trees, tools, and training. That's the mantra that we came up with that really largely described the problems, to which I have subsequently added transmission and tough love. And by tough love, I mean enforceable rules. I'll walk through those in just a sec. How did we get here to that, and where are we going, which again is the theme of what we're talking about at this great conference today. Well, at only 50 years old, I'm probably not the best historian to reach all the way back to Edison and Tesla and all the great giants who built this, or the forefathers of our industry. But I have lived and been in the middle of the last 2 decades of intense policy and regulatory reform in the industry. And so with the ever so slight bias toward Texas history, I'll lay out for you how it has changed and changed so dramatically. And the places I'm going to name, which are chapters or versions 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, I should clarify, are not necessarily times, eras, but they're places along the road to the future grid. Our changes over the past 20 years have been driven by the philosophy, and to his credit, this President Bush's son was my boss for 10 years, and when he first hired me in '95 to be head of the Public Utility Commission, I kind of probed with him what did he want to accomplish through the commission, because my dad here wasn't real excited about his son working for the federal government. He owned a private business, and I'd worked for the federal government for 2 years and for the state government for the next 2 years. So to think about an extension of that awkward 4-year term on the public sector, I had to really make sure it was something that not only I wanted to do that, but one that Dad would be proud of. And so I asked President, or then Governor Bush, what's your goal here? He said, look, we need to open up this industry, meaning telephone and electricity, to competition. He'd grown up in the energy industry and had kind of seen both the good and the bad side of all of this, mostly natural gas and in oil. But he said, you need better prices, you need better customer service, because really you want technological innovation. You're not going to get that from the regulated system. And then he said, finally, and he pointed to the Senate and the House in Austin. He sat in the middle, the governor's office in the middle of the Senate and House. He says, these guys and me matter more to the utilities that you will regulate than the customers do. And that's wrong, and you're going to change it. So that was my kind of mission over the last 10 years, over the 10 years that I served in the public life under him, to really move the industry from one of high regulation, high regulatory responsiveness to government to one that is open, competitive, and open to the customer. Back in version 1.0, which in Texas was largely, and probably across the nation, mid-90s, 95 for me, but specifically version 1.0 of the power industry was wholesale competition. And by that I mean the deregulation by and large of the generation sector of the industry. In Texas in particular, it was also a restructuring of how things operated within the Texas grid. For those of you that may not know, and I'm not sure if an earlier speaker laid it out, but the North American grid is largely an eastern interconnection, a western interconnection, and the ERCOT, the Texas interconnection. And for historical reasons, that would probably worth another whole speech. Just take it that Texas has its own kind of independently separated out, non-federally jurisdictional power market. And for us, that was a great opportunity to allow us to do really the whole complete transition from the old world to the new under the guise of just one player, which was the Utility Commission here in the state. The first thing that happened really, not the first thing, but these next 7 items are the chief characteristics of version 1.0 in not only our power market, but across the world. In fact, we borrowed a lot of great techniques here in Texas and in the U.S. from things that have happened elsewhere in Europe and in South America and Australia in particular. One thing we did in Texas, we had 11 separate little control centers, control balancing authorities for the different utilities that have historically operated here in the state. Those were collapsed into one centralized single control area is what it's called, back in, I think, about '01. And that was a significant step to allow the market really to be what it is in reality, a single coherent market. We deregulated entry at that time in 1995 for wholesale generation. New power plants no longer needed to get a Mother May I yes from the Public Utility Commission. If they needed air permits or water permits, they were sent to the relevant environmental agency, but that's all they had to do. They didn't have somebody at my agency deciding if it was good or bad. That was really for the market to decide. Same thing, power marketers were allowed to come into the system. You weren't just required to be a regulated utility anymore. If you were a qualified power marketer with sufficient operational and financial expertise, those are the only things we checked, and then you could come into the market. There was no more putting into rate base, which for those of you that aren't in the regulatory ambit, and I hope most of you never are, rate base is that old archaic thing of the past where the utility would get an approval on one day, and then for the next 40 years, customers would be paying the bill for that decision. So rate base is what I call kind of like the gulag of the power industry. That was taken away, and in many other states that has happened as well across the country. Not all, unfortunately, but a number of states have gone that route as well. In the power market version 1.0, we also got much clearer rules for transmission, for not only how to build it and site it, but also how to get it paid for, how to get the cost recovered. In Texas, as in New England, and in California, we did a very simple kind of peanut butter approach toward transmission where you dump the cost into a bucket, everybody pays their load ratio share based on usually a peak day allocator factor, and that's pretty much how transmission got built and paid for. Interconnection contracts for new generators, whether they were renewable, traditional, big or small, were all standardized and allowed to happen very quickly. We created a real-time energy market so that customers that were either long or short in any given interval of time from 5 minutes to 4 days to 2 years, whatever, could buy energy in that market. That really wasn't enabled before. We had some very rudimentary style markets, but those weren't enabled before then. Competitive ancillary service markets to buy responsive reserves, blackout reserves, regulation up and down, all those type of extra requirements that you have to buy when you're putting a power package together for a customer. Those were then subject now to a competitive market price. None of this was compulsory, which is good, because in California at the time, year 2000, a compulsory market that required everybody to buy from the centralized real-time energy market ended up resulting in no investment in new power plants. And so California, in fact, ran out of power in the summer of 2000. That was the first job for me when I got to the FERC at 2001, was to kind of clean up the mess and put the fire out. But it wasn't fun, but it was a problem of a bad market design. The price signal was just not there. Fortunately, in Texas, we didn't make that mistake, and most others have in the country looking at California have avoided that buzzsaw as well. With the creation of the ERCOT ISO, Independent System Operator, and regional transmission organizations, as we call them outside of Texas, we have large, independent, regionalized grid operators now, relatively sophisticated grid operators. In fact, I would probably put PJM, the one that serves the Mid-Atlantic all the way over to Chicago, kind of to the Atlantic Ocean, south of New York, as probably the most sophisticated and well-run in the world. Certainly a model here for the U.S. that we look at. But they're all at various levels of sophistication, but quite a bit improved from the days when we had trees, training, and trimming all falling short back in the old days. These air traffic controllers, which are really what the ISOs, the regional grid operators are, they're the real-time energy traffic controllers, but they're also the reliability folks as well now, and have gotten more into the game of regionalized planning for transmission growth. It covers, these organizations cover about 70% of North American economy. There are some holes in the grid because it fundamentally was a voluntary, it wasn't imposed from the federal government. The Canadian provinces similarly did not impose this, but it moved forward with broad industry consensus everywhere except for the Pacific Northwest, the Mountain West, and then the southeastern U.S. Those areas are not yet in what I would call organized power markets. At the time, the blackout, Ohio was in transition to get into a power market, so there was not sufficient tools there to look at that network. These tools are rampant, or not rampant, that's actually a negative thing. These tools are pervasive now with all the regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, but at the time, they were pretty rudimentary. The training that went to the men and women who worked the power grid and worked the power plants has accelerated substantially since that blackout. But at the time, these organizations were just starting to get put into place. First Energy, which was the utility at the center of all this, got into the Midwest Independent System Operator and subsequently got into PJM. There's been a significant investment in Syncrophaser network, and I saw a couple of the student pieces out there, the posters in the hall, in the nice room across down the hall here, that discuss some aspects of Syncrophaser. That Syncrophaser network was a core finding of the 2003 blackout report, that much like the wonderful systems that exist to support the air traffic control system across the country, we needed a similarly robust system of Syncrophaser data, Syncrophaser measuring in real time what the loading, what the directional flow, what the capacity, in fact, usage of the highways of electricity commerce were across the country. That is an ongoing project, but it was substantially accelerated in the mid part of the last decade to where we've got a lot of topography now across the real-time network. The training and mandatory rules, the rules that we had in place in '03 when the blackout happened were voluntary. They were kind of developed by the good old boys club. Now it's part of a regulated, overseen North American Electric Reliability Council, NERC, that sets the standards, and our Canadian provinces work pretty consistently with us on that. There's a part of Mexico that's attached to the northern grid. The southern part of California goes across, picks up Tijuana and the like, but largely it is a U.S. and Canadian effort here when we talk about North American with regard to this particular industry. These regulations included vegetation management. I always loved it. I said tree trimming, in electric speak, you always have to rename something that people understand into something that people don't really understand. Work on that, folks. The future of the electric industry is in this room. If y'all can de-acronymize the whole industry, it would be a real gift to the future. But vegetation management regulations, which basically tell a utility how often they have to trim trees, it had to get that bad, folks, that you had to tell a utility how often they had to trim trees. It was not fun being a regulator on some days. The result was a design and operational efficiency of both generation and transmission that was unmatched in history. I listened with interest to, I think it was Star Rotor, the discussion of the last technology there. A lot of technology, it would be fun to have somebody go back and a historian look at really what happened since about '90 on generation improvements to operational and to design efficiency. We're reaping the benefits of that. I mean, the price of gas has doubled, gas being the primary driver of electric power prices in Texas. The price has doubled, yet overall prices to the customer of power have gone down. And you go, well, why is that? Okay, competition did work at wholesale, and I'll talk about here in a second at retail, but substantial gains were made, and it's often not recognized frequently enough. Substantial gains have been made by improvements to generation technology over the last 3 decades that we're all reaping the benefits from. And it's the kind of things that we, are talked about here at the conference. People in this room are probably thinking of the next great invention on generation improvements. But when I think about how gas used to be used to fire power plants, how much improved they are. I just drove past on the way from Austin to here this morning a power plant called Lost Pines over near Bastrop that I was, the guy who got to do the earth turning back when I had the PUC. But we dedicated so many fresh new power plants back in the late 90s because the price signal was so strong when we restructured our market that everybody came to Texas, and it was fun to look at all the new technologies and compare them to the old plant that was right down the street and just look at the side-by-side comparison on what the old plant could do with regard to heat rate and operational efficiencies and really ultimate conversion of the heat value that's in natural gas as a raw commodity into something that's useful on the grid. So those improvements in version 1.0 are significant, and we'll continue to reap benefits from that for years to come. 2.0, which in time in Texas was really largely 2002 to 2012. Across the country, it's actually in some places not here yet. Some places it already is, and I call that the retail opening, the retail renaissance. The engagement of end-use customers as being something other than serfs on the farm who pay their fealty to the feudal lord. That is what we're talking about when we talk about opening up the retail franchise, is saying, retail customer, you're no longer subject to a regulated entity. You can shop for power just like you shop for gasoline, for homes, for dog food, for groceries, for your children's education, all of the above. That particular exercise here in Texas, we separated out the regulated industry, which I should say, just as a generic thing, as you all probably know, the transmission and distribution part of the industry, which is about 25% of the bill of that all of us pay to our retailer or to our utility, is regulated. And so that, under even the deregulated Texas model, it is still regulated for that 1/4 of the costs. The transmission and distribution network have largely been, I think, at least by the current generation of people in the industry and in the policy side, to be viewed as a natural monopoly. 25 years from now, I could probably say, based on some of the stuff I saw down the hall, we might be moving away from even that being a natural monopoly. But at least for now, for our regulatory construct today, the wires business is regulated. And one of the things that we did in Texas was separate out not only the generation, which had been done in version 1.0, but separated out the retail interface with the customer and put that into the competitive marketplace. Subsidies were eliminated, all the things that regulators and government folks used to do to kind of take care of favored constituencies and bury them in the rates where nobody would know it, and you'd kind of come out from behind the wizard's curtain and just present the rates to the ratepayer. That all was eliminated. They were broken out. Hopefully most of what was good about that old system, such as low-income customer protection, energy efficiency programs, renewable energy support programs, those type of things that the legislature valued and that many Texans value as well, were retained. But they were made clear and transparent so people could see just what they were paying with regard to those subsidies. New customer protection mindset kind of came into being. It was important for the political support of retail competition in this state to make sure that customers felt and perceived that they were being treated as well, if not better, under the new system than they were under the old system. That met kind of the George Bush item number 2, is better customer service. Transmission planning, back to kind of the wholesale level, was advanced to an ISO-centered process here in the U.S. and in many other states, even in parts of the state that haven't quite finished version 1.0. The FERC, my former agency at the federal level, has required utilities within a given region to work with each other rather than just kind of staple their future development plans into a pile and say, this is what we're going to do. They looked at what made sense. For example, I'm involved in a big project now in Arizona, New Mexico. So that process over there is just, this is the first time they're using the multi-state, multi-utility process to review and plan on new transmission projects. Those things are great. I mean, that's what smart people do, is they work with their neighbors and design an optimal solution. But it was hard. I mean, it was surprisingly hard with a limited toolkit that we had at the federal level to actually get that done. We did a big build out here in Texas that I'm involved in as part of my transmission project, which is not on there, but I work with the Hunt family in Dallas on a lot of transmission related issues across the country. We have the state legislature in 2005 reached out to the Texas Panhandle, and they said we want to actually attract the best wind. There's so much wind development in Texas. It's such a great place, ground zero for wind development in the world, but we want to, rather than attach a lot of B- kind of quality wind, there's a lot of A+ stuff up there that nobody can reach. So let's make sure we expand our grid to get that done. So I led a group that developed the actual proposal to get a lot of that wind up there, and so we're building that now. The whole project, not just the Panhandle part, but all the rest of the upgrades to the grid, is called CREZ, Competitive Renewable Energy Zone. That $7 billion investment is the largest transmission project in U.S. history and is going on now and should be online by the end of this year. So you don't really realize sometimes that neat things are going on in your backyard because you don't see them. People in Amarillo are excited. It is a nice place. It is an unusual place to build that much transmission. Anywhere else in the country, it becomes a multi-year battle. Even in fast permitting world that Texas is, it's still taken from 2006 to 2013, 7 years to get that permitted, designed, built. So in other parts of the country, it's much longer than that. But people in Texas seem to like energy infrastructure. It's part of our culture and our history, and it makes it a nice place to build. It was focused on wind. Wind was the impetus for that, but power doesn't know the difference between a wind electron and one from coal or from solar or from gas. And so the other technologies are attaching to those are planning to attach to those power lines as well, and have applied for permission to do so. Also part of version 2.0 was something that kind of envisions 3.0, which is the smart meter rollout. We heard about some of that earlier this morning, It was a small step, and actually it was one that went in a different way than I advocated in '99 when we opened the retail franchise. I thought at the time, in '99 when we were opening up the franchise, that metering should be made competitive. So I thought there's nothing inherently monopolistic about putting a meter on somebody's house. And there really isn't. But as a practical matter, it was in nobody's business interest to invest in a meter when they knew that the customer could pivot away from them the next week and go to another provider who didn't bear the 95 or 102 or whatever 187 cost of putting in a new meter. They would have to eat that cost. So ultimately, nothing happened on metering when the world was crying for it. At the time, Texas was looking at states like California, New York, looking across to Europe and seeing how much advance there had been done in metering. The legislature ordered and required the PUC to develop an expedited cost recovery mechanism so utilities would be happy about doing it. That's it. You show them the money, they do it. It's kind of like a Pavlov thing with dogs. Utilities are the most conservative industry in the country, but they're very financially oriented, at least the privately owned ones are. And so if you hold out the money and you say, it's pretty easy to get this money, but you got to do this project, boom, things come together and happen. So the PUC and the legislature, knowing that, said smart meters are going to be put out in the competitive parts of Texas, and has been not only a reliability bonanza, but has really expedited the competitive retail market, so that when you switch your provider, for example, as you would if you lived in Houston or Dallas or elsewhere, that you could do that within about a 24 to 72 hour period, and the bills would not be incorrect. You would actually do a correct read on the bills and do that. So that was an enabler. That step was a significant one that this state took to enable a lot of this. And then finally, the combination of regulatory incentives and carrots and sticks, again, show them the money and they'll do it, and market forces have done a tremendous job to clean up the quality of our power plants environmentally. And I think it probably was an unheralded part of what Governor Bush wanted. I wish he'd have taken more credit on this issue when he was running against a very strongly environmentally associated Vice President Gore back in 2000. But he bribed, basically, Bush bribed the utilities, said if you want to get 100% of your costs that would otherwise be stranded of doing the transition from the old world to the new in Texas, in our version 2.0, you have to clean up your power plants. A lot of plants were grandfathered under federal legislation on emissions, and we had quite a bit of dirty plants that were allowed to continue to be dirty under federal law. The state did not take any steps to change that until we did that in the power industry bill, and it was a wonderful achievement. That I live in a city, Houston, that's doubled in population since 1975, but yet the air quality, the pollutants in the air have gone down 30%. So sometimes environmental policies can make life a lot better and not cost too much to do it. But additionally, the market itself has shut down effectively every old gas-powered plant and a number of coal plants because they aren't efficient enough to make it. And this is a great gift that competition in the power markets does, is it shuts down stuff that doesn't work. Rather than have a regulator, the government go to a plant and say, I'm going to shut you down, you let the market do it. And because a plant's not efficient, usually inefficient plants tend to be the ones who pollute. That's not always the case, but that was the case in the Texas market, is we had a lot of success from that effective shutdown of power plants, not by our government, but by the power of the market, because the more efficient new gas-fired plants that came into the market got the business, and the old dogs didn't. So that brings us to Market 3.0, and I'm going to use this wonderful it's pretty well read from the back. Can you see that in the back very well? Not too well. I'll walk you through it. This was on Mladen's webpage for the Smart Grid Center, and I like it. It's one that actually I was in a board meeting for my storage company in Austin yesterday, and this exact same graphic was up there. I said, Mladen, have you patented this graphic? He goes, hell, whoever didn't patent it. That's why I pulled it off the web. So I like when people are economical enough to use something else out there that tells a story as good as anything you could create in the lab. This is the mature, competitive, smart marketplace, and that's version 3.0. That's where we're all going. We call it Smart Grid. I call it 3.0. We can call it anything you want, but it is all the technologies that really enable the 21st century grid. And it's stuff that we need. It's not just a neat whiz-bang idea for all of us who like this stuff, but it's important for our economic development as a country and as a world. Characteristics of 3.0, some of which we've got here in the U.S., some of which in Texas, certainly, some of which are forthcoming, some of which are maybe dreams, but dreams usually do come true. Decentralization of the grid to a customer choice-driven type of grid. This schematic kind of indicates not necessarily retail competition, but it indicates a much more decentralized grid, including, I don't know if I have a little pointer. Is this thing a pointer? Do you know, Chad, if this is a pointer or not?
The green line will do a pointer.
Oh, great. I love stuff like this. All right. Distributed solar. I think we've got some solar up here. So I'm going to just go through the mature competitive smart marketplace version 3.0 and just show you how wonderfully this grid, this model that happens to be on Loudon's webpage lays this out. Distributed solar, we see that kind of, I think there's some here as well. Out here, this is an isolated microgrid. Microgrids, to me, you know, sounds great. It's I'm doing some work with wind and solar in Hawaii, and as well as storage. So you've got microgrids, clearly are islands, but even in the continental U.S., I could see a microgrid being a place like the development where Mom and Dad live here in town. You know, separately, newly developed area of town. These big, large retirement centers like you have there in Del Webb, Sun City, up there near Round Rock. Those kind of large neighborhoods, even large commercial parks. Maybe a campus like Texas A&M could be an isolated microgrid. You know, in addition to that, you've got certainly the traditional central power plant. I think in the world we'll always have the need for those. The question is how much. I'm not going to pick the winners or the losers. I think it'll be some balance between a centralized grid and a decentralized grid, and I think you want to keep it largely indifferent. There are some economies of scale, certainly, that come with centralized power plants, just like they do with renewable energy plants. I'm going next week to a large, probably the largest, solar farm that's being developed in the U.S. It's over 600 megawatts in California by our company SunPower that I serve on the board of. But solar has that wonderful aspect of being very cost effective when it's done in centralized plants, but also wonderfully useful because it can be distributed as well. So you've got here where do I have distributed energy? Generators from, this one says energy from small generators and solar panels can reduce overall demand on the grid. So that's what I mean by decentralization of the grid. Another aspect of version 3.0 is going to be the demand participation and the price signals that customers can get from actually bidding in demand. So you've got here, and that's on this particular thing, smart appliances can shut off in response to frequency fluctuations. That's kind of more of a reliability type thing, but what I'm talking about is economic. The price of power in the middle of the afternoon is not the 8 cents that you're paying your retailer. It's really more like 15 or 20, depending on the month. Might even be 12 if it's kind of March or October, some coolish month. But by and large, the peak power in the afternoon is a lot more expensive than the average price you pay. Of course, the power at night is much cheaper. So this right here, demand management is what I'm talking about. And our systems in the country, we're just getting there. This is, to me, a big issue. As a regulator, I looked for it. It was my holy grail for the 10 years I was searching for it, never found. But I think it's coming. I've seen a lot of good programs. I've been advocating them here in ERCOT as well, that we've got smart meters now. We've got a lot of the grid stuff. We've got a whole lot of the openness of this market. If it happens anywhere, first it ought to happen here in Texas. So the ability of demand to participate in the market, not just to solve reliability problems, but to solve economic concerns is really, I think, imminent. And demand has, quite frankly, always been the red-headed stepchild. For those of you that weren't born in the U.S., that's usually the unfavored child, although I prayed to have a red-headed child. I would love to have had a red-headed child, but we got a bunch of blonde and brown-headed childs. But no, nonetheless, the red-headed stepchild is a phrase that I've heard is one that's viewed as the unfavored child, and demand was the unfavored child, has been, because you don't make money really in a volumetric industry where you're charged by the kilowatt hour if somebody uses less kilowatt hours. Go figure that. Why would anybody be incented to make that their business plan? So it's been a little bit harder to get this guy a seat at the table because their business incentives have not been the same. So that's where regulators actually can come in and make changes to enable technologies by changing historic ways of billing for something or you know, what have you, getting those kind of things changed. At retail and at wholesale, you got demand can participate both as an individual customer by maybe cycling your your air conditioner if the system needs it. That's probably further down the road than having it at wholesale, where a large industrial customer or a retailer can manage all of his different constituencies to reduce their load as needed. But they look at the price signals in the market, and instead of being 15 cents a kilowatt hour today, it might be 35 tomorrow because the system's tight and some of the plants are off for maintenance. And you know, if he can go give customers 30 cents a kilowatt hour to back off their load, that, you know, might mean a $10 or $20 bill credit at the end of the month if you do that a couple of days and you have a big enough house to matter. For an industrial complex, that could add to substantial dollars to just furlough their employees at 4 o'clock instead of at 5:30. So not furlough, but to basically say we're going to shut the thing down because I make more money by shutting it down than by generating more widgets today. And that's how a power market ought to work. Find out just what the price point is for people to give you power back, and then at that point you can kind of have a really efficiently well-run system. It is what regulators, and it may not sound like a big deal to y'all, but for me, if I'd have had demand response in the market, I could have had so much less regulatory intrusion into the market for things like market power, for abusive pricing, for market manipulation, if you have the ability of demand to play equally with supply on the grid. So listen to that issue. If you guys think of great technologies to facilitate that issue, you'll be at the front of the class. Smart meters, I should add, are crucial to this. Smart meters, we've had it in large industrial plants for quite a few years, but now that we've got them at kind of the residential retail level, I think we're going to have a lot more ability to make demand a player in this market. Capacity markets are one that I could talk about at some length. If you have any questions, we can do that at the end. But putting that in Market 3.0 is an important part. Sophisticated tools to manage low-carbon intermittent resources. I saw several of these on the, what do we call these, Mladen? The posters? The posters down the hall. You know, as one who's been involved in wind and solar since I got out of federal service, as well as now storage, the ability to manage these resources, because I think the future of this grid, particularly in this state, I'm hopeful that nuclear can get their pricing down, but the pricing that Southern Company's paying to build that new power plant in the southeast, which they are putting into rate base in the old world, the pre-1.0 world, is horribly expensive. And I think if nuclear is going to be a player here in the country, as it should, as a citizen, I care about this. But it's not right now in the price point, even within screaming distance of it. So I'm thinking the future here in this state is going to be gas, and followed by wind and then solar. I would love to think we can get some more coal built. I do like coal. My company Dynegy owns some coal plants in Illinois. They're cleaned up. They're doing a good job meeting all the current regulations. But it's going to be difficult. Our current administration is very hostile to coal. That may persist beyond this term, and I think the industry is kind of moving beyond that. And I think it's unfortunate because we have a lot of it in this country, but it does have greenhouse gas emissions, which I think are here to stay. That mindset is slowly changing, even among Republicans, and I think we've got to recognize that coal is going to be a bit of a challenge. So we're looking ahead in the gas, solar, wind world. We've got to get good tools to manage intermittency. Certainly gas is not intermittent, but wind and solar are. And looking at the weather and the wind patterns and the availability of that are the type of tools that we're only just slowly getting good at. In the last decade, I would say Texas has probably tripled its capacity to really analyze and predict what the wind load is going to be in the subsequent 4 to 48 hours to what we've got. I remember Mark Rose, who was then head of the LCRA when I was on the PUC here, he's now head of one of the co-ops here in Texas, was very big on something called the Mesonet. I think there might be somebody, Mladen, here at A&M who was involved in that, and also at UT. But looking at a network of weather stations across the state that really would just cover the state and provide, much as synchrophasers do on the power network, provide on the wind and on the weather network, a very useful set of data that can be used by our grid operators. That is here in a rudimentary way, but certainly is not what I'd call a firm feature of version 3.0 yet. Another version of 3.0 is redundant and robust transmission distribution grids. We have I would say the grid here in Texas is more robust than most, but its ability to sustain redundancies, in other words, like you have on the, I think the telecom guys are fond of calling it the self-healing network. I would love to see the self-healing fiber network equivalent here in the power industry. It's going to cost money. Yes, it does. The transmission system is not cheap, but it is only about 6 to 7% of the total cost of your delivered power every month is for the transmission grid. But yet it enables so much to happen, and so to happen well. So I do think that, I mean, certainly regulators that have followed me at both the federal and state commission are very supportive of broader investment in transmission, and I think that's going to be a big part of the competitive smart marketplace. Now, to meet common needs, that may have to be some of it undergrounded. That's not really a popular thing with utilities to think about because it's expensive, but I do think we're going to have to deal with certainly the siting issues of transmission are substantial. Amarillo, Texas notwithstanding, it is going to be an important feature of our future, but it's one that's going to be controversial. Computers to manage the flood of information and disturbances. I mean, clearly that was a problem back in the blackout in 2003, was just the ability to process and handle that amount of data. We were talking at lunch about how just, what year was that, 70, that you said we got the power, when you were doing the power network over there, John? 73? So we really just started moving to electronifying or computerizing the electric network just since I've been, you know, teenager, I guess, and that's a pretty short time ago. But that need to have that data managed, I mean, there is a torrent of data that comes out every hour, every minute from the electric grid. If we're going to really run it right and enable computers to make decisions about dispatch and redispatch, clearly having the ability to process that information, have an intelligent network with proper protocols and programs written to make the response come about, that's where you folks in this room have got to come in. I mean, the ability to do that and to put that into the network is going to be crucial to our ability to really get from kind of a 20th century grid to this version 3.0 grid, is not only the ability to collect the data, but to react to it instantaneously and keep the grid stable and keep it working. I think storage will be a big part of that. Certainly I'm interested in that from my development at Extreme Power. We operate a number of different battery technologies, but I think the compressed air storage has certainly been with us a while, and where the geology is good for that, that ought to definitely be a natural solution for what we're doing, not just for system stability, but in the case of compressed air, the ability to use cheap power, take cheap power at night and then use it at the peak of the day the next day. That kind of ability to shift in time the usage of power is again another holy grail that we've all been searching for quite a while. And when the storage needle gets threaded, everybody's got their needles and everybody's got their thread. I'm not sure any of us have threaded that needle yet, but it's the hot one right now. I would say clearly storage is, with battery or battery-like solutions plus compressed air, we've got really a big part of the solution to the grid. And as you'll see here, storage is this one on here as well. I did skip over pointing at these, but sensors and processors are the aspects I was talking about with regard to the computers, the ability to receive the data and then to do something about it, to either to secure a network, to trip something off, to drop a load, to redispatch the lines. Those type of things would be clearly not tools that we are using in abundance right now, but certainly getting there. On the looking forward side, version 3.0 would have a bit more government involvement with standardizing building codes. Even Texas, which is pretty hands-off with regard to telling builders what to do, because God knows their political lobby is very powerful. But the building codes for new and for existing retrofits of homes is a great way to make up for what we've got here. And I don't really see this kind of showing up here specifically, but I think it's implied that that's a big part of the world of the future. Hardened, secure communication systems. Loved hearing this last panel, or the second last panel, on cybersecurity. I think the biggest, the most, I guess, earth-shattering thing that happened to me privately when I was at FERC, and I had really probably under the president's staff the highest security clearance that you could get, and I went to our federal labs out there in where was it, Idaho Falls, where we were doing a lot of study for cybersecurity issues across the country. And certainly in 04, 05, you can imagine where the country was. Maybe until 2 days ago, probably set back and again felt like we were maybe past that. But nonetheless, the hardened, secure communication systems, it was very clear to me from some live demonstrations that were done for me in the bunker there that we have, and in some cases still very much have a very permeable grid. It was laid out beautifully by that panel right there at the end. But I'm very humbled by what could be going on there. I just finished a book, I think last year read a book called One Moment After. It was a book written about what happened when a hostile power, which was not named in the book, fortunately I guess, that put 3 electromagnetic pulse bombs in the upper atmosphere over North America and knocked it out. And thinking about how unhardened our system is. I mean, when we're thinking about redispatch of something to get around a tree line, that looks pretty minimal next to the grid being out for 36 months and what that did to the country. But I don't want to get too dark here because you just ate that wonderful chocolate cake and I know you're on a little sugar buzz, so I want to kind of keep it going. But the importance of getting a lot of this stuff right, and I just again want to underscore that not only was the analysis good, but I want to see the solutions. And the solutions may require some extreme levels of expense that we haven't probably gotten ready for. But when you look at the downsides of what could happen if they're not hardened and secure, that not only can cyber computer bullies come in, but there are some physical attacks to the system as well that are crucial. And as this system has become so important to the country, you might have thought that electricity would kind of go on down, but everything is electric now. We're even moving to, as Mladen was talking about in the panel right before lunch, to where a big part of our transportation system could well come from electricity as well, which leads me to another part of version 3.0 is EV-enabled grids. Manage those valleys of the night. Plug in your car at night. Don't plug it in at 5 p.m. when you get home from work, though. That's the big thing we do have to work on. It's a small thing we can fix, but taking that power that's relatively plentiful at nighttime and charging our vehicles for use the next day. Customer-enabled appliances, we've got that kind of mentioned here already. And then really, at the end of the day, because I'm not real good at the crystal ball game, version 3.0 ought to fundamentally be about being a platform for disruptive technology. And I think the ultimate disruptive technology for me is this little device I've got in my pocket, the old iPhone. I think, this for me is a phone, it's a camera, it's a bank, it's a mail service. So right there I put 4 monopolies out of business. It's a game, it's a music box, it's a movie player, and because of those 3 things, it is also a babysitter. It's a typewriter, it's my access to weather and sports, so I don't ever need the 10 o'clock news anymore. And as a male, I've got to say the one thing that makes this thing worth every penny I pay every month is it's got a GPS, so I don't have to stop and ask for directions ever again. Is there anything left that the electric industry can add to this as far as a disruptive technology? I don't know, but I think this happened, folks. When I was a student here in 1982, I got a little piece of paper from the company GTE and it said grudgingly, "You have the right to choose your long distance service now." And it just seethed with resentment. And it gave me a choice of several things I could check. Please mail it back and we'll get you going. So I chose MCI, I don't know why. But Dad did, and we all did around this family, so we became the Friends and Family Network at MCI, and we were so excited because after 7 o'clock at night, we got to talk to Mom and Dad and the girlfriend and everybody else for 9 cents a minute. Sweet Doug Hearn and I was in Aston Hall over on the north side of campus. We shared a cinder block walled dorm. He was on the other side of that cinder block room, which was supposed to be soundproof. Doug has a very piercing voice. He also had a girlfriend at the University of Texas who, after 11 o'clock, those rates went down to 5 cents a minute. Wasn't that a great thing? And I heard from 11 o'clock to at least 11:45 every night what Doug was doing to stay faithful, true, and loving to Mary. And I got really tired of that, and I just resented that damn rate went down instead of up at night. But nonetheless, that was good old disruptive technology back in '82, and look how far we've come since that time. I think if this kind of disruptive technology and mindset happens at all, and it will happen in this market and in this state first. And how lucky we are, Mladen, that y'all are focusing on that here at the flagship university of this state. The entrepreneurial, anti-monopoly culture that pervades our political and broader culture and our market to match it are crucial to that being successful. The utility industry nationwide, as I mentioned, is the most conservative industry that there is, averse to anything new or potentially risky. It's not horribly incented to find efficiencies or or anything, you know, to save money by the way that the regulatory regime works. But with load growth at about 1% per year looking forward, we've got a lot of opportunity here for that to happen outside the utility industry. Certainly if you've got transmission distribution issues, that will be focused on the regulated, continuing to be regulated utility industry. But all the other aspects of both generation and at the customer side are going to be implemented through the market. And so when I look at that, I think my advice to the academic world is if you've got great ideas, you've got to find, if you're a T&D type of technology, and I'd say maybe 40% of the posters kind of lean that way, your source end-use market's probably going to be the T&D utility, or in the case of like a campus, the utility manager for A&M, or for a large industrial. You could certainly approach that group. On other aspects, everything else, private parties, like Google, like a power producer, like a Dynegy, like the campus here, like a new housing development, like I was mentioning that. Let them road test your research. That's the way. The utility is no longer the only gateway to the marketplace, except for some of these uniquely T&D technologies, which there are some out there, and I recognize that that's going to continue to be a challenge to get pierced through that wall. The regulatory support and involvement is second. I mean, I hate to, you know, as a kind of free market guy, beef up the importance of government, but in this particular industry, because it's so tinged with the public interest, and will be, because it's so crucial to our lifestyle, getting a regulator behind you or understanding your technology is really useful. And so I want to encourage Mladen to invite my successors on these regulatory commissions, as well as from elsewhere, to come here and get exposed to this, because I think that is really crucial to that relationship going forward. And they turn over with every political election, they turn over. But nonetheless, it's important to keep those folks on board and their regulatory staffs as well. One thing I learned to my chagrin as a kind of brusque 32-year-old was revolution ain't what we're about in this industry or in this state. Evolution, okay. Revolution, don't change it. So build on what we've got and make it better. Don't throw it all out and start over. People don't like being told that the last 50 years of their life was a waste. So you build on what the last 50 years built, and then you make it better. And I think people, I learned that the hard way, but I learned it to the end-use customer. Always put yourself in that mindset. Who's going to be paying my bill? And finally, educate people on the problems and the consequences of those problems not being addressed. And then propose solutions that will fix those problems and can be explained well. I like the one poster approach. Now, some of those are pretty dense, even for me. But nonetheless, the ability to take a problem, explain the problem, and explain why your solution fits the problem is a great way to not only get grant money, but to save the future. So at the end of the day, what's the smart grid? It's not just what the dumb grid isn't. The smart grid is at the core, the foundation of our modern economy. One thing I figured out as a regulator is what we do wasn't about, you know, money and all that. It was about economic development and jobs. And so that's why we took a very progressive and I would say aggressive approach toward opening up the Texas market with its pluses and its minuses, and creating a nice foundation for economic development and jobs and all that to continue. It underpins our industry, our manufacturing, our 21st century lifestyle, and as Mladen talked about before lunch, increasingly our transportation platform. How assertively we make that transition, not a revolution, but a very swift evolution, will determine whether this will be the American century or not. And so thanks to what I see going on here and what I hear from today going on, I know where I'm placing my bet. So thank you, and I welcome any questions.